good morning.
Good morning.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell our audience, first of all, who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about your history.
Okay. I farm and ranch in southeastern Australia. I have 2,000 acre property there. We've been there, not me personally, but my family have been on this farm since 1868. So I'm fourth generation on that farm. We've always, my great-grandfather and grandmother have always grown merino sheep for wool production and always grown crops, mostly wheat and oats, those types of crops. However, obviously, in that era, in the 1860s, it was done very differently with horse teams and that form of agriculture. So I guess I've grown up from that background and that I guess philosophy of farming. And then next generation, my grandfather continued that on again with horse teams, and then my father adopted industrial agriculture, I guess, in the 1930s. He far preferred tractors than horse teams. But my father was very innovative. He started using fertiliser instead of manure, horse manure and cow manure as generations before were using. But so he started growing quite a lot of wheat on wheat, and eventually destroyed the whole farm, really. It was, as they termed then, farmed out. Now we know it was the soil was microbially dead. But he did turn around and fix his problems. Interestingly, he adopted the Green Revolution, parts of the Green Revolution, that form of industrial agriculture in the 1950s. And it worked exceptionally well for him in that era, until eventually in the 1970s the wheels started to fall off. Needed more and more fertiliser, more and more pesticides, more and more of everything, which I love to call moron agriculture, but that's another story. But it started to collapse. Now we know the farm ecosystem collapsed.
Yes.
But no one knew then what had happened. So that form of agriculture on my farm and my father's preceding farm, it didn't last very long. It started to crash because of all those inputs, and we weren't farming in a way that could possibly be continued. In other words, what my father was doing, and many of us still do, is grow things that want to die and kill things that want to live. That's the type of agriculture.
That's a good way to say it, yes.
Yeah.
Relative to that, when your father was doing this and the soils were starting to degrade and the system was starting to crash, what else did you notice from an ecosystem perspective, wildlife and plant species that existed, insects? What happened with all of that?
Yeah. It went from a grassland, the farm went from a grassland to more and more annual species, annual colonising species, in other words, weeds. Mm-hmm. Soil ecosystem crashed, and that expressed itself in soil structure decline, acidic soils, dryland salinity, saline outbreaks, all of that, which are really indicators of ecosystem decline. And that became major problems, and that translated into less profit. As that starts to happen, we definitely don't. We're not as productive to start with, but then we need more inputs then to try and prop this thing up that's crashing on us all the time.
So what you noticed was that as the ecosystem and biodiversity of life was declining, profits were actually declining along with that.
That's right, yes. And in relation to wildlife, because I've always been on the farm, in fact, I've only moved once in my life, and that was to a house I built about a mile away from the original homestead. So I've been there.
A really big move, right?
Yeah, really big move. So I've been there all my life. So I've been able to observe wildlife, and in my father's era, and in that high input, high chemical era, the bird life on the farm was very, very low, and almost a monoculture of one species. And I won't go into the species, but specifically what they were, because it becomes irrelevant. But when I started to, I changed the way I managed the farm,
yep.
and started to manage for a grassland, a perennial grassland.
Mm-hmm.
The bird life started to change, more diversity, and interestingly, the introduced birds, the birds that came from Europe, were introduced from Europe, just disappeared, and the native birds all came back. And now there's 120 individual bird species. So there's thousands of birds on the farm now. Now, those birds have great value in that they control insects, they do
Yes.
huge amount of good. And that's just part of it. Like, everyone knows that Australia has a lot of kangaroos, but there's a lot of different species of kangaroos. When I was a child, when I was a teenager, there was only one species of kangaroo there. Now there's 6. Different things for wallabies and all types of things. Now I've seen things like small marsupials, Anticlinus, that's irrelevant, but many things. Koala bears have come back. Once we start to change our farm ecosystem, everything falls into place. Our soil structure is improved, dryland salinity has almost disappeared, many things start to happen. If we start to fix the ecosystem, we fix everything all at once. And that includes bird and animal life, native bird animal life, and everything falls into place.
You know, that's very interesting, because we have seen exactly the same thing relative to the bird life.
Yeah.
As we increase and grow our biodiversity, bird life just starts to explode, not just in numbers, but also many different species.
Yes.
So much so that today I consider them one of our key indicator of being able to, of restoring an ecosystem, a functioning ecosystem.
That's right, yes.
So your father went through this period of wheat on wheat. The soil was being degraded. He dove heavily into, the green revolution and all of that, and profit was collapsing, the ecosystem was collapsing. So when you started taking over and farming, what did you do?
I just need to backtrack a bit and say why I changed.
Yep.
We had a major wildfire in 1979, which destroyed everything. At home we run 4,000 merino sheep and grow about 500 acres of small grain crops.
Yeah.
But in 1979, we had this major wildfire. We lost 3,000 sheep killed in that fire. Wow. Lost all of our infrastructure, house, and all of our sheds, as in barns, and all of our fencing. It was just a blackened ruin, the whole 2,000 acres. Yeah. And that sent us into a financial spiral, and so we were broke. I was broke. I was taking over the farm at that stage from my father. So I had to learn to farm with no money. So I had to develop not only low input agriculture, but no input agriculture. I had no money to farm with. And I started to look at how I could do this without any money. And there was 2 things that I realised. We needed ground cover, No one was talking about ground cover in the early 1980s. But the thing that I was aware of was that our Australian native grasslands did not require any fertiliser, did not require any nutrients applied to them. They were happy to grow in this, on these very naturally poor soils that Australia has, without fertiliser at all. So that was a big thing because I had no money anyway. So I did a few things. I stopped using fertiliser on pastures, and over time I reduced the fertiliser on my growing crops to almost zero. Still use a tiny bit, but very, very little. The outcome of that is that not only has our farm not crashed, which is what I was told would happen if we stopped using fertiliser,
right.
And I've stopped using pesticides and all of those as well. So, but our soil measurements and great detailed soil measurements, and that's down to 2 feet,
Okay.
all of the nutrients have increased, all of the available nutrients have increased by an average of 172%.
Okay, so let me stop you there, Colin. Now, conventional science says impossible.
Yep,
That can't be done.
yep,
But yet that is precisely what has been measured and recorded on your farm.
that's exactly right.
So
Yes,
how? How
yes.
did that happen?
Yep, that's a good point. And you're right, conventional science says that's impossible. Conventional science says if we remove anything, we need to replace it. And I'm finding out that is absolutely incorrect. Now, some of that is easy to explain in that now we have a perennial grassland that I am overlaying with a fast-growing annual crop without killing the grassland, which I'll explain how in a minute. And those grassland perennial grass species have very, very deep root systems on them. And they'd be going 6 feet, maybe more, at least 6 feet, maybe 10 feet into the soil. And they're cycling nutrients and bringing nutrients up to the surface that probably haven't been cycled for 100 years, haven't been accessed for 100 years, because the farm ended up with an annual pasture, not a perennial grassland, in my father's era, and has started to happen even in my grandfather's era. Yeah, so it's now restored to a perennial grassland, which works better. The whole soil ecosystem is now functioning, and that really is the key to increasing soil nutrients.
So not only were you putting roots far deeper in the ground, and you are also significantly increasing the total mass of roots in the ground,
Yep.
but in association with those roots, you now had this incredible array and population of microbes.
That's right.
And so those microbes in association with the soil and the plants was now all of a sudden doing this incredible amount of nutrient cycling.
That's right. Coupled with that is species diversity, because we need plants and microbes in symbiotic relationship. Coupled with that, there's now 60 species of grassland species on my farm. Great diversity of species. And that's just the native ones, so there's more than that when we include the others. And that is overlaid with a fast-growing annual crop, which is pumping a lot of root exudates into that soil and also feeding soil microbes. So we're increasing the diversity of microbes as well. And we have some data on that, like, for example, the overall soil fungi have increased by 800%. Protozoa by 600%, nematodes by over 1,000%. So a huge increase in microbial diversity.
That's incredible. And, obviously we've noted that all over the world now.
Yeah.
And people that are doing things that are very similar. So through the years, Colin, you have developed this system of pasture cropping.
Yeah.
That is quite unique and very fascinating. So tell us, first of all, how did you start to think about that? And then how did you develop the system that you have in place today?
Yeah. Before I start telling that story, we farmed by disturbing the soil and removing plants, ploughing, and now with herbicides. For 10,000 years, we've been farming in that way, with total disturbance and killing things to grow a crop of some type. What I developed, which is pasture cropping or perennial cover cropping, is the first method that actually doesn't kill the perennial plants. It keeps them alive. In fact, it works symbiotically with them. Now, how this has happened, good friend of mine, Darryl Clough, and I, which we neighbours, we were no-tilling leading up to that in the 1980s. And it wasn't working very well, and we were using all the herbicides and all that. So one evening, after we had a few beers, we started thinking about about what we were doing, and we were killing all of these grasses to grow a crop. Our warm season grasses in Australia, and you have the same type of species here in the US, go dormant in the winter. That winter period is when we are planting our small grain crops, like wheat and oats and barley and those species. So in other words, we are growing the crop while those grasses are dormant. So our thinking at the time was, why are we killing these grasses to grow a crop when these grasses are asleep for the winter, when they're in their dormant stage? Why are we killing them? Made perfect sense at midnight.
And after a few beers,
and
right?
those few beers. Yeah. So, and we tried it, and it worked. In other words, what we did was, initially we just reduced our herbicides, but we focused on not killing those grass species, keeping those perennial grass species alive, and then planting into them when they're in their dormant stage, but no tilling or zero tilling into them. Mm-hmm. And it worked fine, which surprised everyone, and especially ourselves. Now we can grow crops equal yielding, grain yielding and biomass yielding as a conventional crop. But that's taken time. I've spent 25 years fine-tuning this just to tweak it and get it working well. Yeah. There's a lot of other benefits that while I was developing a lot of this that I wasn't aware of. One of the great benefits of this is it restores soil ecosystems and farm ecosystems, which sounds impossible. But one of the first things that we both noticed was that where the crop was grown, and at this stage I was just growing oats or wheat, along the drill lines where the wheat was growing, seed that sat dormant in the soil of the perennial grasses started to germinate up in these drill rows. After the next season, like not straight away, but in the following summer, they started to show up in those drill lines. We had accidentally created a way to stimulate the germination of perennial seeds that have laid dormant for decades. And now I think it's because root exudation and stimulating soil microbial life really close to that drill row where that oats or wheat has been growing has stimulated the germination of those seeds. And it's mostly root exudation and microbial soil ecosystem recovery.
See, that's very interesting because, once again, every time you relate something, then it directly correlates to things that we have observed as well.
Yes.
And so you're absolutely correct. We have seen the same things happening. And of course, you can also use livestock, the impact of livestock, to do that exact same thing and stimulate that native seed bank.
That's right. And I might add, it's very important to include livestock and need to be aware that this is all overlaid with livestock. These crops are all vice versa. It depends on which way you look at it. And I'm managing, very large mobs of sheep, 2,000 to 3,000 sheep in one mob, rotating long plant recovery. And so that is also driving it. So it's a combination of both. We need to be well aware of that. We cannot remove livestock from agriculture. We cannot remove livestock from cropping enterprises. They should be integrated. In fact, cropping enterprises and livestock enterprises should be one and the same.
So that's an incredibly important point. And yet that's a point that not just in Australia or the US, but globally seems to be lost on a lot of people.
Yes.
And not just farmers, but also it seems to be a point that is missing in the thought process of our governments, of our institutions of higher learning, and so forth. So why? One of the things we always do in the Soil Health Academy is we ask the why.
Yes.
So if you were to have removed livestock from that equation on your farm, then what do you think would have been the result?
Not as much profit.
Yep.
Absolutely, nowhere near the profit. The change in the farm ecosystem, soil ecosystem, in other words, nutrient cycling, fixing soil structure, all of that would have been a lot slower. It may have happened, but most likely not. And the whole ecosystem would not have functioned. We wouldn't have had those birds there. We wouldn't have had all that insect life there.
Yes.
So the animals are a critical a critical part of it. Absolutely essential. It doesn't matter what the livestock are. They can be sheep, cattle, elephants, chickens. It doesn't matter.
So what you're saying is that the effect on the ecosystem by having both the diversity of plant species and the livestock is far greater than anything that you could have experienced if one of the two of those had been absent from that system.
Absolutely correct. Each one benefits each other so much that the sum of the parts are greater than them individually.
Now we've got all of the crop species, the perennial pastures and the annual crops and so forth that you're doing.
Yeah.
And we've got the livestock that are existing on your farm.
Yeah.
So what kind of impact does that diversity have on the diversity of other species, from insects, pollinators, wildlife, and so forth?
It is huge. It is difficult and probably not been measured and researched of why and how. But I see it as absolutely essential. Even though this is a little bit off the question you asked, the livestock or the sheep are such an important part of growing the crops in that I use those large mobs of sheep in a preparation to plant the crop. And this is an absolutely essential part of pasture cropping or perennial cover cropping. So to pasture crop well, I found that using large mobs of animals to reduce the perennial grass biomass and create a mulch to plant into. In other words, then it starts to look like an annual cover crop that's been rolled. Plus the addition of lots of manure and urine from the animals, adding a lot of plant available nutrients there. 3,000 sheep produce a lot of plant nutrients.
Right.
That benefits the crop also. And allows us then, it's just in a simplistic way, to start reducing our fertiliser inputs. There's more to it than that, but that's just part of how we can reduce our fertiliser inputs.
So by having this diverse array of things that you're producing on the farm, how has that impacted both animal health and plant health?
the animal health has improved enormously, in that we rarely get anything wrong with our sheep. Like, for example, we used to treat our sheep for internal parasites or worms 6 times a year. Now, we either don't do it at all, or we may do it once a year. We produce 20 tonnes of wool a year, 20,000 kilograms of wool a year. Because we can now measure the tensile strength of the wool, we know how healthy the animals have been throughout the year. And if that wool is very sound or very strong, it means that those sheep have had a very even, very high quality diet throughout the year. It's worth a lot of money to us. Wool is sold on especially tensile strength and many other. That's one of the big drivers of profit in it, if we can produce that really high quality wool. We're better off, if we get out of the way and let Mother Nature drive it for us, it'll fix itself. I think natural systems are amazing in that they will regenerate if we allow them to. Now, mostly we interfere too much. So, but if we just, we can steer it and encourage the change, but mostly if we just get out of the way is a lot better.
So in other words, wool is not wool. Yeah, no. And you are paid for higher quality wool.
That's right.
That you produce.
Oh, yeah.
And very interestingly, that higher quality wool is a direct indicator of the health of that animal through that year.
That's right. And our wool is used, it's an elite wool, and is used in high quality, very high quality garments and $10,000 men's suits, that type of thing. And mostly sold to Italy. Surprisingly, Italy produces the best woolen garments in the world, and that's where most of our wool goes to. So
what you're saying is that the livestock are far healthier, the plants are far healthier in this type of system.
Yeah.
So that leads us then into the economics of this. So if, first of all, you're benefiting that your livestock are healthier because you're producing a higher quality product that you're getting a premium for in the marketplace.
That's right, yes.
So how are the economics on the plant side, on the cropping side?
Yeah. I'll just backtrack a bit and I'll cover the economics overall, because it is a totally integrated system.
Yes.
But I do know the economics of each individual enterprise as well. In my father's era, that high input Green Revolution era, the costs on the farm on today's figures were over $80,000 annually for fertiliser, pesticides, all of that.
And that's on about 2,000 acres?
2,000 acres.
Okay. Yep.
Now I don't spend that $80,000 at all. So I'm $80,000 ahead before I even start. Now, there's a few other things here too. Because I've restored the native grassland, a major part of the enterprise, a major enterprise that I have on the farm, is harvesting and selling native grass seed. That native grass seed is $70 a kilogram or $30 a pound. We sell 1,500 sheep a year, and that native grass seed is worth more than the sales of 1,500 sheep. So we again, stacking enterprises, but in a different way, but still stacking enterprises. The reason I can sell those native grass seed is that we've restored the grassland. And there is a big market for native grass seed. And I think there's a big market for native grass seed in this country as well. So that's just one way of doing it. But this is all complementary. That native grass seed is very beneficial to the sheep, as I said, and it's very beneficial to the crop that I'm planting. Cost of production for wool now is extremely low. It's almost zero. Now, growing the crop part of it now, I'm using 70% less fertiliser than I did when I first started. So less fertiliser, a lot less, and almost zero. starting to use some more biological type fertilisers. I probably don't need fertiliser at all, really. It's probably just a bit of a security blanket. Less fertiliser. I don't use fungicides, and I don't use fungicides because our soil's healthy. No seed dressing. And that's because our soil ecosystem, again, the soil ecosystem is functioning and driving that and managing those crop diseases that many people have. I don't use insecticide. Now, and all of this has been measured, I might add. Like, the farm at home is the most researched farm in Australia. So all this is very well documented. So now we know that the insect population at home has increased by 600%. 600%. Sydney University did the measurements and found that they've increased by 600%, and species diversity has increased by 125%. And that's related to restoring the grassland ecosystem or the farm ecosystem and the soil ecosystem. That's why that's happened.
So that's very interesting, because there have been studies that have been released, very recent studies that have shown that we're in the midst of a global insect collapse.
Yeah.
And in Europe, it's estimated that there has been a reduction anywhere from 70 to 75%
Yep.
of the total insect population. And yet on your farm, using these methods, you have seen insect populations increase 600%.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the number of species increase 125%.
That's right, yes.
That's phenomenal.
And the outcome of that is, because now we've got more species diversity, in other words, more spiders and predatory wasps and lady beetles, that type of thing, they are managing the crop damaging insects. To control insect damage on farms, we don't need more pesticides, we just need more insects. It's really quite simple. And the reason why we're getting reduction in insects around the planet is fairly obvious. We use too much insecticide.
Well, there's no insecticide that is species specific, is it?
Not that I know of.
Exactly.
Well, maybe they tell us there is, but I think they're telling us porkies.
And so because of that, and because of this tremendous growth in the insect population on your farm, you've been able to eliminate pesticide.
That's right. And I guess part of the reason we've got this huge increase in bird population and bird diversity is partly because of all those insects.
Well, two reasons really, right? Because of the insects, food source.
Yep.
And because of the increased diversity in plant species,
that's
food
right.
source.
Yes.
So you have dramatically increased the food source, not only for your insects, which is how you drew them in,
yeah.
but you have also dramatically increased the food source for your birds.
That's right, yes.
Amazing.
And everything else. Increased the food source for my sheep and cattle, and increased the food source for all of the native animals that are there now.
So Colin, I'm a scientist. And as a scientist, we tend to be on the skeptical side,
yeah.
right? And yet you're telling me that insect populations have increased 600%, species numbers 125%. So how do you rectify that? A lot of people are going to have a hard time believing that magnitude of increase.
Yeah. When I first changed and started to develop this form of agriculture, I saw some things happening on the farm that should not have been happening. I saw increase in perennial plants, and I saw the soil structure change quite rapidly, and I was seeing this increase in insects and increase in birds. There was things happening that I think no one's going to believe this. So what I did was encouraged scientists and researchers and universities to come to home and measure this. And fortunately, they did, because I was starting to publicly say this and get criticism. And I said, well, if you don't believe me, come and measure it. And it was just what happened. My farm in Australia is the most researched farm in Australia.
Wow.
And partly because of that. All this stuff was happening, and I encouraged the research to be done on it. Like, for example, our main lead research organisation, CSIRO, have done work at home. Sydney University have done work at home. Canberra University have done work at home. Melbourne University have done work at home. So we have a lot of data on this to back it up. And I encouraged that because I thought, no one's ever going to believe this. Because things were happening that should not have happened when we looked through it through conventional agriculture eyes.
Exactly.
Haven't used insecticide or fungicide for about 30 years.
30 years.
Yep. So no problems with any of that. So that, in a practical sense, that's money I don't have to spend.
Yes.
I don't have to spend money, much money on fertiliser. So the costs are extremely low. The cost of growing a crop is about a quarter of what a conventional farm would be in Australia.
So let's put this in perspective, Colin, okay? And let's back up just a little bit in your history here. So your father was producing pretty conventionally.
Yes.
And producing very much commodity products.
That's right.
And when you started, you were basically doing the same.
I was doing the same.
And then the fire forced a major change in your thought process.
Yes.
And even in your economics that you had available.
That's right.
So you made all of these changes that you just described. So what you have effectively done, though, is you have not just moved from monoculture production to polycropping and biodiversity, but you have also found a way to grow products and raise products that actually can capture a premium. They're worth more than just a conventional agricultural product.
That's right, yes. And another thing too that I'm doing now, which is moving it forward, and I have to partly blame Gabe Brown and David Brandt for this. when I met Gabe and David in 2011 or 12, somewhere around that, when I was here in the US, I saw they were using multi-species crops. Mm-hmm. So I was, even though I was growing crops into 60 species of perennial grass,
right,
I was still growing a monoculture crop of wheat or oats. So I got thinking about what was happening here, and I was wanting to drive this further, especially the soil health side of it. I was wanting to just move it forward again. So I started growing multi-species crops of 8 or 10 species. But this is done differently because the multi-species crop is my crop, and the grass is the cover. It's reversed around the other way. It's perennial cover cropping, so the grass is the cover crop, the perennial grass. So the multi-species crop is the crop. So all of the benefits that we get from multi-species crops as a cover, I can get all of those benefits as an actual crop. Now, what becomes interesting is that I have harvested multi-species grain from those crops, but I can also harvest a single species cereal grain from those crops as well, if I want to, depending on which way. And to achieve that, all I've really done is all of the crops that I grow and always have grown have been grazed.
Okay.
Yep. And I've grazed them and then harvested seed from them. And that's oats or wheat. So all of them, right from when I started doing this, they've always been grazed and harvested for grain. But this is even different again, in that by using animals and grazing those crops, 2-3 times, we can, over 2 or 3 grazings, we can remove the broadleaf species like brassica and pea and vetch and those species, and they won't recover from the graze, but the oats or wheat will recover from that graze, providing we remove the animals early enough. So we can still harvest a single species grain crop with these methods as well, but again, using animals.
So this has had a profound positive impact on the economics of your farm.
Oh yes, oh yes. I wouldn't be there today if I hadn't done this. We couldn't afford the methods we were using. And not only could I not afford them financially, the farm couldn't afford them ecologically. The farm was crashing anyway.
Yes.
It was going to get to a stage it wouldn't have produced all these things.
Right.
Yeah. And not only that, it's interesting. I've been saving $80,000 annually, and I calculated how much I'd saved, and it's got over about $3 million over the years. Yeah, but I got no idea where the $3 million went. But I've saved that. But in other words, if I hadn't saved that, I'd be back.
It's $3 million you didn't spend.
$3 million I didn't spend.
Absolutely. Or you didn't have to borrow.
I didn't have to borrow. Yeah.
So let me ask you this question then. Is there something special about your farm or you that only you can do this, or can your neighbors do this?
Yeah. Interestingly, wherever you get change anywhere in the world, the immediate neighbours never adopt. But
very true.
Now, there's a lot of adoption in Australia of these techniques, and there's growing adoption here in the US. And now I've estimated there's about 3 million acres grown worldwide that are pasture cropped.
3 million acres
about
now.
3 million. That's an estimate, but there's quite a lot. I mean, 3 million acres on a world scale isn't very much.
Right.
But, yeah.
So what you're saying is that this is directly applicable virtually anywhere, any country.
Anywhere, any country. There are restrictions, well, not necessarily restrictions, there's no such thing as a restriction, it's just we haven't worked out how to do it yet.
Right.
As you get further in the US here, as you get further north, you don't get the difference in seasons.
Right.
To get this to work really well, we need a difference in seasons, summer and winter. As in the southern parts of the US, also from the middle to south, it will work fine because you have a lot of warm season grass species, and you have a period where in the winter where those grasses go dormant, and providing it's not too cold to grow that crop in that period, it'll work.
Even in the northern climates, though, we can find ways to adapt and adopt to be able to at least apply some of these principles that you've been developing.
That's right. That's right. And the fit is most likely companion cropping. Yeah, we can get things growing quite happily together. After all, we do that in gardens. And,
yes, we do, don't we?
And that's another point. We should farm like we garden. We know how to grow things.
So here's a very important question. A lot of people are listening to this, and now you have certainly piqued their interest. So how does someone start this?
It's like doing anything new or different. We need to transition into it slowly. Small areas. Understand it. Get educated on it, on how this how you can do this, and transition into it slowly. Understand the broad concepts of it and where it would fit into your enterprise. But most importantly, just do it slowly and carefully, and it needs to fit your enterprise mix, and also your head needs to be in the right space to adopt some of these things. But this is very simple, really. If I can dream this up, it's got to be very simple. So, and it is very easy to implement. But there's a few critical things, like we use animals instead of pesticides, for example, or animals instead of herbicides.
Yes.
So there's a few key things there.
So you would recommend, first people to begin this, they have to educate themselves.
Yeah.
And to seek out knowledge, and that would include talking to people such as yourself that have already learned the ropes
Yeah.
and been through a lot of trial and error.
That's
and
right.
taking advantage of your knowledge.
That's exactly right. I did a lot of experimenting over the years and made a lot of mistakes and failures, and as happens in anything new. Don't repeat the same mistakes I did. Learn from my mistakes and move it forward.
So what do you think is the biggest thing holding producers back? Because obviously this works, and it provides them with this unique opportunity, both from a biodiversity standpoint and an economic standpoint.
Yeah.
Why are more farmers and ranchers not jumping all over this?
Yeah, it's different and new. People don't like to change. They're happy within their own space.
Especially those of us in agriculture, right?
Especially those in agriculture. Another part of it, unfortunately, the advice we've been getting for the last 30 years, I guess, a lot of it's been wrong, but it's still being repeated now.
Yeah.
We need to move forward. We need to move on from that. We need to understand that that worked then. We've got better ways of doing things now.
What do you think, in your opinion, is the one thing that would most give producers confidence to start this type of transition?
If people understand the profit of something to start with in the change, there's a lot of ecological benefits in this. But most of the time, producers don't understand, or they don't realise that. So if people understand we can make more profit with this method and many other regenerative forms of agriculture, the main thing is to just do it and try it, whichever form of regenerative agriculture that we use.
So if we look at the big picture of agriculture globally, we know that we've got a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Both from a soil degradation and biodiversity standpoint,
Yeah.
To an economic standpoint.
That's right.
And it's not just in Australia, not just in the US, but many other countries are experiencing very similar things.
Yep.
So in the big picture, in your opinion, what are the changes that are needed?
In big picture, we need to restore the farm ecosystems and soil ecosystems. And I guess they're both interrelated anyway. In the really big picture, this planet is really hurting. This planet is in serious trouble, just like our farms are.
Yeah.
This is the only planet we've got, and it's like a big paddock. We can fix our farms, but we can also fix this planet at the same time. And it's really simple. This is not difficult. We just need to mimic natural systems. We just need to mimic Mother Nature. I mean, it is really easy. Blueprint's already been written for us. We just need to copy it a lot closer.
You know, that's a beautiful analogy when you said it's just like a big paddock, because to me, that really drives things home. Well, this has been wonderful. I greatly appreciate it. Colin, thank you so much.
Thank you.